Open the eyes of my heart, Lord. I want to see you. We're talking this morning about vision. Vision, nothing to do with the spectacles that help us to see a little bit better. Our eyesight is improved. Much more to do with the Bible that helps us to have insight, not eyesight, insight into what the Word of God is saying to us today. And so this message from Pentecost as it comes, with Peter preaching, your young men will see visions and your old men will have dreams. What is vision? What is it really? In the Bible, the most quoted text about vision is from Proverbs 29 and verse 18, where there is no vision, the people perish. I want us this morning to look at a different definition of vision. Vision is the self-revelation of God. It is God's activity of revealing God's nature and purposes to men and women who are open to hear from our Creator. God gives vision always to those who are open to hear from the God who created us. I've been working recent years in Cliff College, a college that was founded in Methodism in 1904, but had a history before that of a man who saw this wonderful property, Cliff House as it was called, in 1835. My daughter has us watching all these property things on television that you have here, making the house better and making it true and all this. No, he just saw this property, 1835, and felt that this is what God would use as a missionary training center in the future. He bought it in 1835, and it took several years. It was when he died, actually, that it actually moved into becoming a missionary training center. And the man who fulfilled James Hilton Hume's vision was a man called Grattan Guinness. You've heard of the Guinness, but you won't have heard much about Grattan Guinness, even though Grattan Guinness in the 19th century was the Billy Graham of the time. Preached in the UK, preached in Ireland, preached in America, all over the world. He was a preacher, Grattan Guinness. Yes, he was part of the Guinness family, the family that said Guinness is good for you. But what most people say is, well, Guinness is good for you, yes. But the idea of Guinness came because they were trying to find something to make up for the contaminated water that was there in Ireland, and people began to drink this Guinness and enjoyed it. And we all think of Guinness as one of these beer kind of things that are a problem, but actually the Guinness family were all Christians, deeply committed Christians. Many of them went out overseas in different parts of the world, sharing the message of the gospel to all kinds of people. And this Grattan Guinness gave up all thoughts of the riches that he could share from this whole business of the Guinness family, and was the preacher that became the fulfillment of the vision that made Cliff College a missionary training college where people could come. He'd already set up a college in London, in Harley House in London, but here people could come and learn animal husbandry, carpentry, things that would help them to survive when they went overseas. So Cliff College came into the hands of the Methodist Church in 1904, and ever since has continued that vision of James Hilton Hume of training people to go overseas, to share the gospel, and in all these times we have been involved in that as a Methodist church. I can't claim that Caroline, she's there, sat there. She doesn't do any of the work here. I'm the only one that does the work here. But anyway, we can't claim that we had a vision when we went to Sierra Leone. We had a feeling that God wanted us to serve overseas, and that idea was that we would go where the church sent us. Well, we went to interview by the Methodist Church, and you know what the Methodist Church is like in America, just the same as in the UK. They interview you and ask you daft questions, like my wife, Carol, who was a doctor, was asked the question, how will you feel about working alongside or under African doctors? And she had to reply, well, in Bishop Auckland Hospital, where I work at the moment, I'm the only English doctor that's there. We went to Sierra Leone. We began our work in Sierra Leone. Heather was a year when we went out there. We began our work in Sierra Leone in all kinds of situations, but mainly rural situations where when you're talking about looking after a church, this church is being looked after by your minister and a team, looking after 50 village churches, looking after several schools, looking after all kinds of work that was going on in that part of the world. And we thoroughly enjoyed our time there. Peter, our son, was born a couple of years after Heather, and they spent all their younger years in Sierra Leone and didn't suffer any harm from it. But you'll be the one to judge that better than I can over the years when you're here. So, but during this time in Sierra Leone, and I was just a young probationer minister, I hadn't too much clue about what I was doing initially, but I discovered that every time somebody suggested doing something new or doing things in a new way, the difficulty was convincing the church that this was God speaking and wanting something new being done. And again, I found this the same in my ministry in the UK and elsewhere. Again and again, when something new is being prompted by God, it is usually a group of people within the life of the church who's, oh, we've not done that before, or we can't go that way, we can't go this. Oh, have you ever been on church councils where everybody's agreed? No. So my discovery in Sierra Leone was that whenever something new came up, somebody was there to say, oh no, we can't do that. We had an agriculturalist came out. He was farming family, he was a minister, and I was looking after 2 circuits of 50 village churches at the time. He came, and instead of going in and doing a circuit, looking after some of these churches, he started doing agriculture with these people. A minister, clerical collar, and he was doing agriculture. Within years, he had all these people who were blessing his name and coming into the life of the church because he was teaching them how to get 3 harvests out of rice instead of 1 in the year. We had a situation where many people, Sierra Leone is one of the poorest places in the world, and yet it had loads of diamonds. Who made the money from the diamonds? The capitalists. The Western capitalists made the money from the diamonds. De Beers, very largely, and British companies alike, made the money from the diamonds. But we had a diamond centre, a place called Tongafield, and because the leaders of the church who set up the church in Tongafield were polygamists, none of the churches would have anything to do with them. They were Christians. They began their churches on a veranda of a house. They gradually moved into a dance hall, a Saturday night, cleaned up the dance hall from the drunken labours that had been on there on the Saturday night, and had church in there on a Sunday. But we churches, the denominations, wouldn't have anything to do with them because 4 church leaders were polygamists. I don't know how they managed it. I can't manage with 1 wife, never mind 3 wives. But there we are. That's a problem for Africa and has been for some time. But we, in the end, we took on this church, and within a very short space of time, we had up to 1,000 people worshipping there in Tongafield, all through those 4 people who were not acceptable because of their cultural traditions, even though they were deeply committed to the Lord Jesus Christ. There were problems in Sierra Leone even when we were there, the coups and counter-coups, and I've been in the hospital looking at dead bodies and talking with the families as a consequence of such fights and the like. But nothing matched what happened in the 1990s in Sierra Leone. Just a question, how many people have seen the film Blood Diamond? Good. A number of people. If you haven't seen it, Blood Diamond, Hollywood style, but gives a good picture of the violence and the damage that was done to people and relationships and villages because they took the drug-crazed youngsters, the rebellion in Liberia, moved over from Liberia to Sierra Leone. They wanted money for guns and this and that, and eventually they stirred up Sierra Leone the same, and young people were shooting their own families in villages at the behest of the rebels. That went on through the 1990s, and Carol and I were invited back to Sierra Leone in 2001, just as this was coming to an end. And as we went back, we thought again as to what we might do. Because when we got back to that church, we found an amazing response to all that had happened to them and what they were trying to do in mission and reaching out into fresh places. And as we flew back to the UK after meeting friends, and there isn't time, because Chris has me on the clock this morning particularly, there isn't time to go through all these people who did so valiantly, did so well. Some of them were killed, some of them damaged for life by what went on in the 1990s. But as we went back to the UK on the aeroplane, which happened to be a Russian aeroplane, a Russian jet, I was questioning, what can we do to help these people now? And the first thing that came into my mind was, because I was a lecturer at Cliff College, perhaps we could bring one or two of these ministers back to Cliff College, and we could help them and get some books for them and this kind of thing. But God said to me, no. And there on that aeroplane, I wrote down on a sick bag, it was empty at the time, I wrote down on a sick bag how we might set up an international training centre. The book is there, it's going into your library, and that tells the first 14 years of the Cliff College International Training Centre. Because as I jotted that down, I came back to the UK, and those of you who've worked in education know how wonderfully supportive principals are when you go to them and say, will you spend some money on this? Well, the support I got was, well, we won't spend money, but we'll help you, Richard, set up an international training centre to go back to Sierra Leone. I went to the World Church office in London, and the same kind of thing. Well, as long as we don't have to do any of the work, and you will do the work, yes, we can give you some funding to try a pilot scheme with the International Training Centre in Sierra Leone. We did a pilot scheme. 2002 to 4, we began training in international diploma in applied ministry and mission. 2 years, we had 99 people on the course to start with. 73 graduated at the end of the course from various churches. And that began what people just see as quite a miracle of what went on after that. Because we began with Sierra Leone and continued with that work over the years. And then Nigeria, the largest Methodist church in Africa, said, can you come and do something similar with us in Nigeria? And so we went to Nigeria in 2006 to 8. It was a 2-year program with lecturers going freely, not being paid for expenses. It was a program set up so that over 2 years people moved to graduation. 2006 to 8, 2008 to 10, 2010 to 12, and so it's gone on. And then once we'd done that so many times in Nigeria, then the leaders of Nigeria, the Methodist Church, said, hey, we want to come to the UK. We want to see what places Methodism has in the UK. What's this Epworth place that John Wesley was brought up and so on? And so they came. They came and visited, and again, they were renewed and refreshed by seeing and hearing what was the history of the Methodist Church in the UK. When we began this International Training Centre, we had no idea of where it was going to go. The thought was Sierra Leone in their need. It's blossomed into Sierra Leone, Nigeria, and latterly into Uganda, because there in Uganda, it's a small Methodist church. They began in the 1980s, believe it or not before that time, and gradually they've put together a Methodist church, both United Methodist and a British Methodist church there in Uganda with very few ministers. And so we had to begin the training program there too. And now we have 5 young ministers training for the ministry in Kenya who will be helping to run the Methodist Church in Uganda. It's wonderful how God has worked through all this, and I can only keep coming back to what is said in the scriptures. You know, we can have visions. And personally, you'll have a vision here at Homosassa. Individually, personally. Never mind the church, you individually. You will find that God is speaking to you if you are willing to hear from God. If you're willing to hear from God. And if you're willing to hear from God, you'll respond to that personal vision. But also you'll get behind the vision that is the Homosassa Methodist Church. What is your vision for the future? What is going to make a difference so that more of the younger people of this next generation are going to fill these pews alongside of you? I don't know what it is, but I do know that I picked up recently a book called 60 Great Founders. And as I looked at this book, and it talked about the foundation of Gideon's, it talks about Full Gospel Businessmen's Fellowship, of missionary aviation. All of these founders, there was one or two people who had a vision, heard God's vision, and responded to it in setting up these things. This is your cue, if you like, because I can only talk about the vision God gave me, and God produced the International Training Centre. What your vision may be in the future, I don't know, but I can say vision is the self-revelation of God. It is God's activity of revealing God's nature and purposes to men and women who are open to hear from God. God gives vision to men and women who are open to hear from him. May God bless you in your vision, personally and as a corporate community here at Homosassa. Amen.